Go to Action Park. There's no other park like it.
There's nothing in the world like Action Park.
Hello and welcome to the ParkStop podcast. My name is Alicia Stella. With me as always is my co-host Ian.
Hey kids.
And today we have a very special guest joining us. Journalist and filmmaker Seth Porges is here.
Hey guys.
Seth writes for big publications like Bloomberg and Forbes, but he also recently co-directed and produced the film Class Action Park, now streaming on HBO Max.
Awesome.
So we're going to talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. An amazing film. If you haven't seen it,
Yeah,
stop
it's a good
right
movie.
now.
Yeah.
Go purchase HBO Max.
Yeah, as a journalist, I totally recommend it. It's a good movie.
No bias here at all.
We all know what Action Park is by this point, but do you really know everything there is to know about it? Like, I was kind of caught off guard by some of the stuff in the film. So it's a great documentary. So we're super excited to have you here in our interview series.
Yeah, so what caught you off guard? Like, tell
Yeah,
me.
I want that too.
Well, okay, I did want to start by saying I had seen your original short version, which was the most insane amusement park ever on Daily Motion.
Yeah,
Like, that was back 7 years ago.
2013.
And I think that's the first time I'd ever heard of Action Park. And I just rewatched it again today. And I'm like, it's so funny to see everything condensed down to like 12 minutes. And I'm like, no, it's going too fast.
Yeah, it's also like amazing when I look back at that, at how little I knew back then. And also just how my take on the park and my interpretation of kind of like why the park's important and what it means has changed and evolved. And also just like, there's like factual inaccuracies in that because, it took years of research to really kind of uncover a lot of the dirt, so to speak.
So you never went to it as a kid or anything?
Oh, I went there as a kid. Yeah.
I was gonna say.
I went to, we spent a lot of time going to amusement parks. We went to Disney World every year. I think we had, we went to Universal Studios all the time. We went to Busch Gardens, King's Dominion, all Great Adventure every once in a while, the East Coast. But then every like couple times, maybe like 2 times tops, we went to Action Park. And Action Park was just, the second you walk up to it, you just know this place is different. I like to say, when you walk up to Disney World or Magic Kingdom or Disneyland, like you see this giant castle, and that's kind of like here's all what you need to know about the park. It's like a big fantastical fantasy universe. First thing you see when you walk up to the gates of Action Park is a giant enclosed tube water slide that goes into a full vertical loop, like a roller coaster. And that likewise is like, here's everything you need to know about this park. Nothing here makes sense. And it probably will hurt you.
Literally insane.
Yeah,
Completely
exactly. And
insane.
it's
special like Disney, but the opposite.
Yeah, it's like the first thing you see. It's the very first thing you see is this giant loop-de-loop water slide. And it would just tease you. It was almost never open, but you'd see people go down it because they were constantly sending employees down it in this like Sisyphean quest to somehow test it until it would work well enough that they could send like all of the general public down. So for years, literally years, they're just sending employees down and tinkering with this thing, trying to get it to work right. And it just never worked right because, you go into a roller coaster, they strap you in and they can kind of control the momentum and the friction and the speed. Like it's like very controllable. But when you have a water slide without like even a raft, everybody's body's different. The friction, the weight, the water pressure, like no two people ride the same. And there's no guarantee you would actually make it through that loop. So they'd send people down and just a lot of people would get stuck or they'd smash their face when they hit the top. It just never worked right.
Seeing the feature-length documentary and learning that there was a hatch at the top for getting people out that were stuck.
Yeah.
Like, that's something that I never would have
actually,
guessed.
Yeah. The hatch was actually at the bottom. That sort of animation there was more showing how they were opening it up and seeing the teeth that got embedded.
That's right. The teeth.
The teeth.
So,
the unexplained scrapes.
Yeah, the lacerations. So I guess I should explain is that basically in order to test the ride out, the owner would stand next to the slide waving $100 bills in the air. And any of these teenagers, like 14, 15, 16-year-olds who wanted to serve as test pilots would get $100. And this is like 1980s money. You're 14 years old, $100. That's like, that's good money right there.
That's a Nintendo right there.
That's a Nintendo. That's like 3 games right
That's
there.
true.
That's Super Mario Brothers 1 through 3, maybe Battletoads too. And so kids were going down this thing. Oh, the one correction I need to make, of course, is that only the older kids got $100. The younger kids got $50. So they would send these kids down, and
It's age discrimination. They don't know.
absolutely everything there was a little like that. So they'd send these kids down, and the first couple kids who went down, they come out with like busted up mouths and, as it happens, missing teeth. And they opened up the slide, and they found there was insufficient padding. So they go in and they, of course, fix it up, tweak it, add some padding. This thing was constantly a work in progress. And they send some more kids down, and those kids come down, and their mouths are fine, but they have lacerations all over their body, and nobody is sure why they have lacerations. So they open up the slide, and they found that the teeth from the first group had gone embedded in the padding and was eating into them like some Lovecraftian, monster, just this terrifying nightmare fodder. My goodness. So.
Didn't they start by sending a dummy down and it came out without its head on?
Lots of dummies. It wasn't just one.
Oh,
Yeah. So they sent
it wasn't just
one. Yeah. And they were like missing heads and missing body parts and all that kind of stuff. And then the first human that went down supposedly was the owner's son. He was the kind of guy who sent his son down, who went down in full hockey gear. He claims in his book. And so he didn't lose his teeth. That was the, kids after him because he was wearing like a helmet and stuff. So. Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they should have just supplied everyone with, rugby gear before you go down or something.
Yeah. I like to think what's so strange about this is just how long the owner kept doing this. Like it was well into the
It was a
90s.
dream. He wouldn't let it go.
I kind of feel like the entire park was in service of getting this one slide to work, as if it's so weird. Like it was just the cost of getting this thing to work in terms of $100 bills, sure, but the untraumatized brains of teenagers. But I just kind of feel like he thought something incredible would happen if they got to work. Like it would open up, like the machine in Contact or something. It would like open up a Stargate. Like how else to explain?
If you build it, they will come.
It's like if you can somehow get this looping water slide to work, some magical thing would happen that we never got to see. And just what was driving him? It's like the whole thing was in service of this. I feel like
everyone has their legacy.
Yeah, everyone has their legacy.
Well, if they had an engineer.
So I never went.
I don't think they had an engineer. That's the problem with it.
No, I said if they got an engineer, it probably would have worked.
This is a napkin drawing that somehow got turned into reality without going through the motions.
Yeah. Literally, the owner drew it kind of reminds me, and there was like an early cut of the film where we make this connection explicit, but it's like in the movie The Hudsucker Proxy, where he just has like a circle on a napkin. And it's like, for kids, right? And it was like, yeah, sure. And it was literally like that. He had like a circle on a napkin, like he's in the Hudsucker Proxy. It was like, for kids, sure. And they built it.
Oh man, I wish that was in. I wish that was in the documentary now.
Yeah.
In Class Action Park, I noticed, was it Andrew Mulliville's interview said from 2013? Was that from the original short version?
It was unused footage we shot at the same time is what it was. It was nothing that was actually in the original short, but it was unused footage. The family, the Mulville family, Gene Mulvihill, of course, was the founder, creator, visionary mind behind Action Park, declined to participate in our documentary. But we have
that was my assumption.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Okay.
Yes. For sure.
The family regained ownership of the park because it was like temporarily named Mountain Creek. After your short version, did they rename it back to Action Park? Do you think because the popularity of bringing up the whole nostalgia of it?
I know as a fact that's exactly what happened. So the timeline was the park and it was open from 1978 to 1996, shut down after 96 season, kind of stayed empty for 97 and 98. It was purchased by a company called Intrawest, which was this big multinational, basically ski resort company. They owned Whistler Mountain, and they were mostly interested in the ski resort. And the thing about Action Park was it was a summertime park built adjacent to a ski resort on a mountain as a way of kind of turning a ski resort into an all-year resort, was sort of the idea. So
which is brilliant, by the way.
Brilliant.
Credit where credit is due. That's smart.
Especially if like a big part of your business is selling condos that are kind of on a ski slopes, all that kind of stuff. You want to create activities that last more than the 2.5 months that New Jersey has snow. This is not like...
Besides Oktoberfest.
Yes, besides Oktoberfest. So they... what was I saying? Yeah, so what was the question again?
The timelines.
Yes,
1999.
Okay,
Sorry.
no, it's all right. So 96, 98, it opens as they changed the name to Mountain Creek. When Intro West buys it, they take out all the really crazy rides. Entire Motor World section is taken away. So like the speedboats, the racing cars, all that kind of stuff. And it basically becomes a much smaller water park is what it really was. And it stayed this kind of nondescript, somewhat forgettable regional water park that people, only locals would ever have any really reason to go to until 2010 when the Mulvihill family repurchased it. And that is kind of amazing. So, this park was founded in 78. They lose it after a 96 season. The family takes back control in 2010, just 2 years before Gene Mulvihill died. And then in 2014, after we put our short out, they rename it Action Park for a season. I think it was just one season, as a way of sort of cashing in on the nostalgia. They were realizing that people, rather than kind of running away from this reputation of this infamous place of Action Park, they realized maybe this is something we should kind of lean into a little. It didn't actually work out that well. The hordes of people didn't flock in trying to relive their Action Park days. So it was changed back to Mountain Creek.
It's because they didn't have the looping slide that would have brought them in.
It was a rebranding thing. They were putting in, they made kind of a show about their tagline at the time was all of the thrills, none of the spills. So they were kind of trying to.
Oh, that's not the way I thought. I wasn't where I was thinking that was going.
Yeah, so they were leaning into it a little, and they had a lot of kind of big plans to make it a little bit more like the olden days of Action Park, less in the lack of safety department and more in the we're going to build some really creative, insane rides that you won't see anywhere else department. So they actually announced that they were going to build a new looping water slide, sort of a Cannonball Loop 2.0, and that ride was never built, but they made an announcement that they were going to build it, and didn't happen. And then the Mulvihill family lost control of the park a year or two after that, changed hands a couple of times, and in 2018 it was purchased by a guy named Joe Hessian, who was a teenage employee at Action Park back in the day. He worked there when he was 14 years old, and he's a local kid, and he took back control of the park and is a really great guy, and I think running it as a really great resort now for what it is.
So what is it called now? Is it back to Mountain Creek? Or?
Yeah, it's back to Mountain Creek. Yeah.
In case anyone listening wants to go visit.
Yeah, and if you're from like the North Jersey area, you know about Mountain Creek, if only for the skiing part. It's one of the closest ski resorts to New York. So if you like live in New York, there's like vans and buses that'll just like pick you up in neighborhoods and take you there because it's it's like 90 minutes away. It's a day trip.
Does it still have the Tarzan Swing?
That actually was there until maybe 2 years ago. So that section of the park that had the Tarzan Swing and a ride called Cannonball Falls, which was imagine like a sawed-off shotgun, just a ride that just like ends and then shoots you out over 10 feet of water. Those rides were kind of old school Action Park rides that were still there until a couple of years ago. And the reason they were closed off eventually was kind of similar to the reason like Disney's River Country was shut down. It was like natural spring-fed water area that was unchlorinated, and it just becomes a little dicey keeping those kind of areas open for all sorts of reasons.
Well, in the documentary, you mentioned that it's like cold springs, so people not expecting it, you'd fall 20 feet down into freezing cold water.
Absolutely,
hypothermia for fun.
Like a wooded, shaded area, and that place, that water was just brutally ice cold, like knives in your skin cold. People would go into shock. They'd forget how to swim. There are stories about people having like heart attacks when they hit the water. It wasn't pleasant, and it would totally catch you off guard. And that water was extremely deep. It was somewhere neighborhood about 20 feet deep. So if you went into shock and you kind of lost the ability to swim, you're going down a pretty fair distance, and people were just constantly being pulled out by lifeguards.
Meanwhile, all the teens up on the top waiting in line are calling you names
Yeah.
for not being able to handle it.
The New Jersey welcome, so it's if you're jumping off the Tarzan swing, which was like a rope swing that you'd do tricks, you weren't supposed to do things like backflips or show obscene parts of your body, but that would happen all the time, and it became this very like exhibitionist part of the park. People would just go and try their best not to face plant. The thing was though, like people would get hurt on that ride all the time because they would grab onto, it's like a trapeze triangle kind of, and it was really hard to kind of get a hold on it, especially if you didn't know what you're doing, and people would just like slip immediately, and they'd like hit their heads on the platform that they were jumping off of. So Yeah, you wouldn't even get that far. You just fall and like smack your head into the back of it, or you'd like scrape your feet on it, like all sorts of injuries just from losing a handle on it. Or a lot of people are kind of unable to really hold their body weight, like do a pull up for that matter. And people would hold on to this thing and just kind of dislocate their shoulders, like kind of just all sorts of bad stuff would happen. And then all the
Just
Jersey
thinking
watching you,
about
screaming at you. Yeah.
yeah. Just thinking of the height of it, there was this water park. I don't even remember the name of it, but when I was little in South Florida, there was this water park, and they had this like high jump thing into a really deep pool, and it was like 20 feet down. You're jumping off of a restroom building, like,
Yeah.
and I remember being like way too young to be up on this thing, and there's people behind me, and I have to jump, and it just feeling like hitting concrete, like because it's way too high. And it's like that's my own little small taste. And I thought my whole life, I'm like, oh, that's crazy. I can't believe they let people do that. And then I watched this documentary, and I'm like, okay, that was safe by comparison.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that wasn't the most dangerous ride by a long shot, Action Park, but that ride became, I think, one of the most famous rides because it was one that people, a lot of people might have been like too young or scared to do things like the looping water slide or some of the more infamous, really obviously scary attractions. But young kids were going off the Tarzan all the time. So for a lot of kids, and kind of dealing with, I mean, it kind of embodied a lot about what Action Park was, because it was a ride where, Action Park was really a park where all the rides were ones where you kind of controlled the action to some degree. It was an experimental park in the sense that the owner wanted to create a place that was closer to a ski resort, where instead of being strapped into like, a Space Mountain and the machine does the work, these are vehicles or rides or experiences that you're in control of, like how fast you go, how high you go, however, what you do there. And, you're giving a lot of control to the patron, sometimes with disastrous effect. But the Tarzan Swing was a really, I think, specific embodiment of this, because people of all ages were going off of this thing and of all ages getting hurt off of it. And so people who might not have gone on the Alpine Slide, might not have gone on the speedboats, might not have jumped off the cliff, were going off the Tarzan Swing. And it became, I think, an important part of sort of the Action Park image and lore and legacy because of that.
Was that the area that had like the man-made rock work around it? I remember
No.
watching the documentary and saying, I can't believe this place had beautiful rock work that still holds up to 2018. Like looking at new footage.
Yeah, the rock work, they were actually pioneers in that kind of stuff. They were pioneers in a lot. It's weird because the park was a trailblazer in a lot of different ways in terms of the amusement industry. It was either the third or fourth modern water park in the country, depending on how you count them. There was Schlitterbahn, there was Wet n Wild, there was Disney's River Country, and then there was Action Park. And nobody knew, as we say, nobody really what a water park was. You couldn't just like go to IAPA and buy a bunch of slides and then create an off-the-shelf water park. So these people were inventing them as they went along, whether it was park employees, whether it was the owner himself, or whether it was these kooks who would basically be in kind of like the small tables in the back of these industry conventions who nobody else would talk to, who had ideas that they had never built as a prototype. The owner would be like, that sounds fun. Let's build it. And they would build it without any testing and then send teenage employees down. So it became just a really experimental park. A lot of rides were ones that like Gene found in Germany and kind of like imported in. So like the Alpine Slide was from this German company. This thing called the Aerodium, which was a skydiving simulator, was from this German company. He would just kind of travel the world looking for these weird ideas and then brought them to New Jersey.
I'm curious about the Surf Hill. My friend specifically and I were talking about it after watching the documentary. He said when he would go, he specifically would see people with their faces really messed up after the Surf Hill until it got chilled out. And he was actually curious, and so am I, if there was more stories you didn't share from the Surf Hill.
Yeah, the Surf Hill section of the movie was very brief, but there's a lot of great things to say about Surf Hill. Surf Hill is basically this giant foam slip and slide that would be rolled down the side of a mountain, and you get on a mat and you just go face first down the slip and slide and build up some speed, and you kind of race your friends. There'd be like 8 or 10 lanes, and it was kind of like a fun race. And the ride actually is still open at Mountain Creek, but it's a little different now. And the things that was there back in the day that is not there now is that back in the day, the employees realized they could lift up this mat and put either other mats under it or trash cans or any sort of big bulbous object and create these jumps. So the employees
The
would
airtime hills.
yeah. So we have some footage where those are mostly employees, but also guests, are going off a surf hill and are getting like serious airtime, just like flying off this thing. And that's because the employees would literally lift up the mat. It was primarily the far right lane. If you're looking at it, so the ones on the left side weren't like this. They would put like trash cans under it and build up jumps. And this went on until a guest broke his neck on that ride. And this ride was also interesting because it also had kind of an exhibition, like observation deck area. So people would stand at the base of it and just watch people either wipe out, or the real reason people would sit there is because a lot of tops were lost on that ride. So park management in particular would often make this their first stop in the morning. So it's like 10 a.m. time to see some skin before getting the day.
Oh God.
Yeah. So that ride's still there. You can ride it, but it doesn't really it's not like that anymore, I'll say.
Can't be modified?
It probably could, but different management now. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll ask. This place was pretty much run by kids.
Yeah.
So because of that, I think what you would expect, it's like Lord of the Flies almost, like what would happen if kids were running a water park. And there's a love shack, there's parties going on.
There were actually numerous love shacks. We talked about the one at the top of the Alpine Slide. The other infamous in the movie we talked about that one. The other infamous love shack was the control room for the wave pool. A lot of hanky panky was going on in there as well. So you'd be next to like this big mechanical fan equipment, and that's where stuff would happen.
Just describing it, smelling like socks and locker room. And,
No. It was. That's an important feature of this park, and I don't think that was unique to let's just say regional or smaller amusement parks of this era. A lot of them were staffed by like local high school kids and whatnot. Action Park was managed by local high school kids, except for like
that's the big difference.
Yeah. So like 16, 17-year-olds would basically be told like you're in charge of a third of the park, and they'd be put in as managers. Happened all the time. And so it wasn't just staffed by kids, kind of like the movie Adventureland or whatnot. It was run by kids. And also add on to that the fact that a lot of these rides were experimental rides that in the best of worlds might have been capable of being dangerous, even if you're doing everything absolutely correctly. You add in this, lackadaisical, young, inexperienced managers with, and I think this is even more of a factor into the park safety record, the kinds of people who went to the park. That's when things could become trouble. And what I mean by that is that the park was known. It was known that this was a dangerous, chaotic place where you could do whatever you wanted. And rather than deterring people, that became the entire appeal of it. So people would go there expecting that they could do whatever they wanted. They could break rules. They could go down that ride 6 people at a time. They could stop in the middle of a tube water slide and their friend would smash into them. They could go down the Alpine Slide and never apply the brakes. They could do whatever they wanted. And bring in this fact that this is in New Jersey in the 1980s, this culture.
Yeah, the 80s.
The 80s, but New Jersey in the 80s. It's a culture like where people are just trying to one-up each other. It's like when you're building an ill-advised dirt BMX ramp and you just make it bigger and bigger and bigger to impress your friends or to prove who's not chicken, like you're in Rebel Without a Cause or something. Yeah, exactly. Only they're doing that in an amusement park.
I mean, back then in the 80s, like we watched Stranger Things and stuff, and like people nowadays, young people are watching, like, how are the parents not, like wondering where their kids are? They're gone all day. And it's like back in the 80s, we would get on our bikes and we would not be home until the sun is down, if you're lucky, because we needed dinner. Like we would be gone all day, and that's just the way it was. I remember in the documentary, like you had some kids that rode their bikes 10 miles all the way to Action Park, spent the day, and then went home. Parents had no idea because that's where you go for freedom, like because you could.
Thanks to the 80s and BMX, I have fake teeth. Thanks.
There you go. You know what I'm talking about. And that's the thing. Like, even if you're not from the tri-state area, even if you never went to Action Park, if you grew up in that period, you understand, I think, Action Park, because these experiences, this kind of self-destructive, unsupervised, latchkey upbringing was endemic to growing up in the U.S. at that time. The thing that made Action Park different was it was these sorts of experiences within the perceived safety of a gated amusement park. So when you go to like, Disney World, you get a Tower of Terror. You're told this is dangerous, but that's a story. That's imagined here. You don't think this elevator is actually going to hurt you. When you're like 3 or 4 or 5, you don't understand the difference between like reality and fantasy. Maybe you do, but when you get older, you realize it's a story. Action Park, it wasn't a story. Like, that danger was real, and getting to the end of that ride, in the same way you might be proud of yourself for like riding a roller coaster when you're young, just because you did it and you made it to the other end. That was like a real thing, even for older people at Action Park, because there was a real chance that you might not make it to the end of some of these rides.
Well, you get to the top of Alpine Slide and there are photographs of kids who have been injured to remind you, like, there's still time to turn back at this point. There's like, just in case you weren't like, we have that
booze. And I mean, if you thought you got if you thought Jersey was tough on you for face planting off of the Tarzan Swing, you don't want to know.
You don't chicken out.
If you're on the downward going ski lift, if you get back on that ski lift going down from the Alpine Slide, you would never get it. You better not show your face at school on Monday if you're doing that.
Is at the ski lift and everyone's spitting down. That's it epitomizes the mentality here.
Elbowing the cart, slide. That's the thing I thought of.
It wasn't just spit. They were, literally taking their Alpine Slide cart, like this, 30-pound piece of plastic and metal, and knocking it off their ski lift, trying to hit people going down the slide below as a sport, And there's something about like Action Park where you kind of feel like it, like, you should get hurt, or maybe you can't get hurt, or whatever it is. Or if you don't know how to swim, that's okay. This place will protect you. It created this like weird illusion of invincibility that I think it's kind of how every teenager just sort of feels a little bit. Like, you kind of feel invincible, and you throw it into this place where these things are going on. It's a deadly cocktail. It really is.
I'm watching the documentary, and having seen the mini documentary and seeing video on Defunctland or hearing the stories on podcasts, I'm waiting for the Alpine Slide. I'm like, where's the toboggan thing? Where's the toboggan thing? And I think you held off for like an hour in this documentary. And I'm like on the edge of my seat. Cause like, I remember the part with the surf thing, and like the team members are flying into the air, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know about that. That's awesome. But I'm like, where is the Alpine Slide? And then it finally gets to it, and I realize why it's edited in such a way is because, now we're going to talk about the serious stuff. Because I didn't realize just how serious some of these injuries and the deaths are at Action Park, because we're too busy making fun of it most of the time.
Exactly.
But
that was absolutely the point. This was a topic that to some degree has become kind of a joke. It's something people laugh at because it's so absurd, because it's so weird and kind of funny that this place ever could exist. But people
just that commercial alone, where it's like, just go to Action Park. There's no other park like it. Like, it's become a catchphrase now.
I love it here. These rides are amazing. But to the people who got hurt there, it's dead serious. And so it was really, I think, important for us to build up and lean into this legend so that people who weren't familiar with Action Park could understand kind of how it had been treated before we kind of tear it down and kind of show the truth behind it. So, we wanted to, and the reason the first part of the movie is kind of fun and funny and everything, is we also wanted to make it clear to people like what the appeal of this place was. We wanted to put you in the mindset of like a 1980s kid from New Jersey who knows in the back of his head, this place is messed up, but is super excited to go there anyway. Like, we can't just say, oh yeah, this is a place that bad things happen. You needed to understand why people went. You needed to understand that appeal, and I think a really visceral level. And then we kind of pull the rug out from under you and show you the reality. I think it hits so much harder that way.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate the filmmaking aspect of it. And like, this is why it's on HBO Max. It's an incredible film. Like, it's not just goofing on this park. It's like, it goes pretty deep into the story behind everything. I didn't know about the kayak experience. Someone was literally electrocuted because to make the waves, there were fans under the water.
Yes. And there was either a loose wire or a short circuit, something like that. And somebody either flipped over or stepped outside of their kayak, and they got electrocuted and were killed. The photo we show of that ride, if you look online all day long, you'll never find any photos of this ride. It was kind of like a holy grail, like white whale thing was actual documentation of this ride. But somebody sent us this photo pretty late into production, and it was dated, the photo. And it was actually taken on the exact same day that person died on that ride.
Wow.
That's crazy.
crazy, absolutely crazy. So that ride was drained. The park refused to accept that there was anything wrong with the ride. They said they drained it and shut it down because people would be too intimidated by it. That's what they said. So I guess they had a point.
Yeah.
You did tell a lot of stories like this, like the sadder stuff with the death. Was there anything you didn't or couldn't include that you wanted to, that was kind of on the same plane, just to not weigh it down too much?
I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Like the movie it's a brisk 90 minutes. In another world, this could have been like a 6-part series or something, but we really wanted to make it breezy and watchable. There's all sorts of stuff. I mean, I can kind of go into a little bit more detail on one story we do mention in the movie very briefly. We talked to a former security guard who talked about how he had been told that the owner of the park, Gene, kept a MAC-10 machine gun in his desk. Well, the full story is that he and a buddy of his had heard this, actually broke into the owner's office to try to find the gun so they could play around with it and like shoot cans or target practice or something with this machine gun. Their assumption being that if the gun was found missing, the owner would never report it because it was an illegal gun to have in the first place. Well, when he got to the office, the gun was not there. What I didn't know until a couple of weeks ago, speaking to another former employee, is why the gun was not there. Because this other former employee, just a little bit before then, had heard the exact same thing, had broken into Gene's office and actually found the gun, as well as a 9mm. And they took the machine gun and they played with it. They shot stuff up. And then the gun was gone because very likely one of those employees stole the gun is why it was gone. Or the owner found it had been missing and realized that, maybe I shouldn't keep it in an unlocked desk drawer.
Yeah, probably. Probably.
And this is the same owner that wanted to create a fake cattle rod to create the atmosphere of don't not pay for a ticket for the whatever, so will cattle rod shock you. And then there was reports that it had happened.
Yes. So this happened. I spoke to 3 people who saw this happen. So the owner of the park was upset that people were kind of cutting the lines for the ski lifts. And so he wanted to make a show about there are consequences if you cut the lines at Action Park or the ski resort. So their plan was, so he had this toy cattle rod that would make a noise. And he brought one of his employees who we speak to in the movie into his office. And he takes the toy cattle rod, brings it to his own chest, and it makes this noise. And he pretends like he's been shocked and is dead. And the employer's like, oh my God, like, what has he done? And then Gene was like, ha ha ha, it was a joke. He's a big prankster. It was a joke. It's a toy. And then he pitches this idea, which is that, people are sneaking on the rides. Well, maybe what we should do is get one of those like real tattooed, pierced, dirty looking kids who works at the terrain park, have them pretend like they're cutting in line. Gene himself would stand by the ski lift, see this guy who looks like he's cutting in line and go, hey, there's no cutting in line, and then shock him with this cattle prod. The kid would then pass out and pretend to be dead, be carried away by ski patrol, and then everybody would know you don't cut in line at Action Park. Well, the guy who he pitched this to, Joe, was like, that's crazy. You can't do that. Joe was out of town for some period. And then while he's out of town, he gets a call from guest services saying, what do we do? All these people are complaining, saying that they just saw somebody get murdered in line for the ski lift. And so he actually did it. Yeah, and this guy was a character. He also had a fake insurance company based in the Cayman Islands.
Well, I was going to ask you about that next, but first I was going to say the when I hear the cattle rod story, all I could think is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and it's like no ticket. Like, do you want to create some kind of? And I wonder if he was watching that movie, and that's where he got the idea.
But later, maybe you're right. He probably just saw Last Crusade and was like, I want to do that.
It's the 1980s, man.
I think you just cracked the code here. Yeah, I think you're right.
But yes, fake insurance company. This is something that only a full-fledged documentary has the time to really delve into, because if in a short form, you want to talk about all the crazy, insane rides, but getting deeper into it as a businessman, or according to his son, he was ahead of his time, I believe is what he said. Fake insurance company.
If you ask, people close to them, they'll charitably call it a self-insurance scheme. It was, according to New Jersey State Commission investigation, a fake insurance company. He didn't want to pay insurance premiums. It was kind of an ideological thing for him. Like, he just kind of didn't believe in the concept of insurance. He thought that if you got hurt, somehow it was your fault. You should be the one who has to pay for it. But he legally needed to have insurance because he was leasing land from the state. And part of the terms of his
Right.
lease for part of the park was that he needed valid insurance. So his workaround was to create this fake insurance company that was based in the Cayman Islands. It was called London and
Trailblazer, because I like did people do fake things in Cayman Islands? Is like when I think of that, I think of it as more of a modern thing. He was one of the first to start one of those fake businesses in the Cayman Islands.
A real pioneer in white collar crime. So he created this fake insurance company. He didn't just use it to avoid paying insurance premiums. He also used it to launder money and to issue bogus performance bonds. So if nothing else, he was very efficient with his schemes.
Seems like it. I'm curious, the footage, how much of that footage actually came from the Headbangers Ball episode with Alice in Chains? And was there a reason you picked that episode in general besides?
I mean, there's not much from it. It's pretty obvious, I think, what shots are from the Headbangers Ball episode, because you can see Ricky Rackman are the members of Alice in Chains in it.
Yeah, of course.
We have we were really fortunate to really dig up a lot of archival footage. And that was, I think, a really big part of what we spent the past, all of our time doing. It came from everywhere from, people just sending it inbound, because, I was sort of known in it's called the Action Park world, because I'd made that short a number of years back. And so people started reaching out to me with their stories, with photos, with their videos.
You inadvertently chummed the waters for getting more information on this park.
Since this movie came out, I've chummed the waters 100 times more. I can't tell you I just got sent to me. Oh my goodness. So we have in the movie, like, just one shot of a newspaper clip where it's described how somebody lost their finger on the Alpine Slide. The person who lost their finger reached out to me and sent me a video of their fingerless hand.
Oh my God.
I was like totally wild stuff like that. Totally chummed the waters, though. All sorts of people reach out to us just to kind of put the bat signal out. I'm in touch with just various like Facebook groups of people from Vernon or Action Park employees or all that kind of stuff. So I had a pretty wide net to cast. And then there was a lot of just old style shoe leather digging through attics. People were like, I think that box over there might have some stuff. And so we would just like dig around and find stuff.
That's awesome.
Are you familiar with the One Day at Disney series, documentary and shorts on Disney Plus? Because what they did is they filmed a feature-length documentary called One Day at Disney, which is like a mini propaganda piece about It's So Wonderful at Disney. It's mildly interesting. You're like,
Disney
oh, look,
Plus, you're telling me that something would encourage you to go to the park? Oh my goodness.
Well, I like the Imagineering story because they flat out said, like, here's a failure, here's a failure, here's a success. And I was like, okay, that's more straightforward.
It was great. One Day at Disney. I think like our movie is sort of this weird, evil stepsister of the Imagineering.
What I was suggesting is, after the documentary was complete, they had cutting room floor, 99 other interviews they hadn't used. So they released them as 5-minute like vignettes. So what you should do is you should make a never-ending series of 5-minute vignettes. Here's the kid that lost his finger. Here's what we found out about this. And like, I would keep watching it forever, and it would keep me subscribed to HBO Max, just like,
Maybe. There were so many people, like everybody who went to Action Park, whether you just went there once when you were like 12 years old or you work there, has stories. They saw things that are unbelievable. It is this never ending like spring of insanity. Like nobody went to Action Park and didn't walk away seeing things that really stuck with them for the rest of their lives. It was a wild.
I got a friend that's scarred from the Alpine Slide. So like literally
everybody was scarred from the Alpine Slide.
Yep.
It was like we have that photo, that photo we have where a girl is like gleefully showing off her Alpine Slide wounds and has this big smile on her face. I think that tells you so much about Action Park. But that photo came in like a week and a half before the movie came out. That was like the super last minute like airdrop in kind of thing. And once I got that photo, like, oh, we have to show this because we realized we've been like talking so much about these Alpine Slide burns, these friction burns, but in like a really abstract way.
Well, like really after the summer, coming back to school, everyone's comparing their scars.
and this photo came in, and we just realized like we haven't actually shown these things, and so we slid that in, and I think it was a really effective.
Yeah, photo. I think the interview stuff you got with Chris Gethard was awesome. He seemed to have so many stories, and I love that dude anyway. He's hilarious. So
he's so good. And he's so like, I mean, his interview was, I said this before, I felt like I was in a room getting a private concert from Mozart. It was like everything he was saying was just amazing. And it wasn't just funny, like it was meaningful and heartfelt. And I think he really gave us the tools to understand how this place of tragedy and pain and death could coexist with people's coming of age and the stories that they look back at fondly. And that was something that I don't think, when we went into this project, we fully understood. It was a mystery we were trying to solve, let's just say, is how the same place could be the home of this dichotomy of such happiness, and joy, and fondness that for people who grew up going there, but at the same time, a place where such terrible things happened. And I think him contextualizing it within what it was like to grow up in New Jersey in the 1980s, I think was so key to us understanding that.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's a really good storyteller. His special on HBO was great too.
How did he get involved, or how did some of the other folks and comedians get involved as interviewees for the documentary?
Well, there's not that many comedians in it. It's mostly, and all the ones who are in it are people who grew up going to the park. So they kind of,
how did they reach out to you after the other one? I mean, Chris was in the original small one, right?
Chris was in the original, so he was, it was natural to be in this. John Hodgman, who's our narrator, I heard that he had gone to Action Park, and we were looking at a narrator. We had early cuts to that narrator, but I thought like it really needed one just to make things clearer, because there's so much stuff happening that we just need to quickly get into your brain without boring you. And
he did an amazing job, by the way. I've never heard him be that serious, and it's beautifully done.
I barely recognized him.
Yeah, I had heard he went to Action Park, and when I heard that, I was like, well, he's our guy. He clearly is that. I mean, of course, he had a personal connection to having gone to the park, but more important than that, I was familiar enough with his work to know that he was somebody who could straddle comedy and also earnestness, but also do comedy in a way that came off as intelligent and serious. He's like a brainy comedian. Like that's his, he's smart. And we needed somebody who could sort of intellectualize the proceedings and make people think a little bit more cerebrally about it, and also sort of straddle the line between the humorous and the serious. And I just, even if it's not explicitly something he's done in his work, I just knew he could do it because I knew his sort of persona and the way he delivered things. And also he's just got an incredible voice. He's like got this iconic kind of like NPR-ish voice that I just was perfect. Yeah.
There was I think there was one other person. There was a actress that I ended up Googling on IMDb.
Yeah. She was in Parks and Rec. And she was actually like a late, we shot most of the movie in 2019, the summer of 2019, but we added a couple pickup interviews just in like the month or two, like really like maybe 2 months before it came out. We just had a couple pickup interviews, and she was one of them. And I found out she went to Action Park because she was actually quoted in the New York Times article about our movie as having gone to Action Park. So I was like, oh my goodness, that's perfect. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I did want to add, let's see, what I have my list of things. We touched on it, but I did want to talk about the wave pool, because
wave pool.
Like we have Wet and Wild. Wet and Wild here in Orlando is one of the first water parks.
It was the very first,
like modern day. Yeah, the first water park. But our wave pool was not as treacherous, I guess.
Yeah,
and it lasted all the way until a few years back.
The wave pool's still there. Yeah, this one's different. It was different. It was very different because, okay, so imagine you go to like IAPA and you're like, I want to buy a wave pool. And then the thing about the owner of the park you have to understand is he would take these ride ideas or concepts that would come to him from other people, and then he would personally, let's just say, plus them up by making them more extreme, taller, steeper, faster, more whatever it would be, just more, And so you take something like a wave pool, which came from an outside vendor, and you just crank it up all the way. Is what he would do. Just crank it up. And so they would have go. You go to like a wave pool today, and wave pools are still out there. The Action Park wave pool is still there at Mountain Creek in a very different operational state. And typically now it's like a couple minutes of light, gentle waves followed by like 20 minutes of nothing, right? Well, the Action Park wave pool was like 25 straight minutes of 4-foot waves followed by like 3 or 4 minutes of nothing, and then like then you look, is anybody on the bottom of the pool? And,
Yeah,
like what's
the
gone wrong?
stress for lifeguards. I think the documentary, you say that it was like a rite of passage. Your first day as a lifeguard, they put you
Yeah,
at the death area
the
of
death
the wave
chair.
pool.
Yeah,
Oh
they
my!
called the area where the water kind of reached shoulder height, so that when the waves were turned on, it would go over your head. They call that area the death zone because people were just constantly being pulled out of there because you're in this area where you're standing, and then suddenly the water's over your head, and maybe you don't know how to swim all that well, which a lot of people at Action Park did not know how to swim, and suddenly you're just getting pulled out. So the lifeguard chair that overlooked the area, they called the death chair. And as a way of kind of breaking in new lifeguards and really kind of showing them like, this is serious. You can't let your guard down. This isn't like a calling it in kind of lifeguard job. You're not just, checking out babes and flexing your muscles. You got to like keep your eyes on the pool. They would put them into the death chair with the knowledge that in the first like 30 or 45 minutes, they'd have 5, 6, 7 saves in all likelihood.
Why did they keep running it so long? Like
That's a question
at a
about
certain
everything
point,
at
like,
Action Park. I mean,
yeah, I guess that, yeah.
Well, it was a different. I mean, the short answer is New Jersey. It just was. But I mean, but that was the ride that ended up killing the most people. But the ride that ended up hurting the most people was the Alpine Slide. And the Alpine Slide on a busy Saturday was capable of injuring hundreds of people a day, just a day. And that is astonishing to me because it's, there was a really significant chance that you would get hurt going down this ride, like a high percentage chance that would happen. It wasn't just like a freak accident. People would get hurt. They'd skim down this thing. It was a track that a lot of people think was made of like concrete or cement, but was actually mostly made of asbestos. People would skim down this thing. It wasn't designed well. It wasn't designed with like physical modeling or engineering in mind. So if you didn't know the right places to brake, if you didn't know how to distribute your body weight, or maybe your brake wasn't working, or maybe the person behind you's brake wasn't working, you were going to wipe out. And people were constantly getting hurt on this thing, just constantly. And they would literally just like hose it off the blood and gore and then send somebody else down. They never really shut it down. Like when people would break their arms and maybe shut it down for an hour, then reopen it. It wasn't like red alert, red alert. It was just a constant all day thing. People getting hurt on this. We talk about in the movie, you get hurt, they take you to this infirmary shed. They'd spray you with this like orange Windex bottle, of like iodine alcohol. And they had a circle drawn on the ground. And they'd tell you that if you could stay in the circle while they were treating your wounds, you'd win a prize. And over a couple year period, only like 2 people managed to do that. And they didn't actually have any prizes ready. So all they could produce was like a pen. And so, but what is, according to Judd Apatow on Twitter, the screaming Steve Carell made in The 40-Year-Old Virgin when he had his chest wax was directly inspired
Kelly
by
Clarkson.
the screaming he heard people getting their wounds treated at the Alpine Slide.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I still think the most incredible thing was the woman that was doing the spreadsheet. It took her all week to do all the injuries and stuff. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was a 40-hour week. She worked admin. So the person we interviewed in the movie, Darren, his wife worked admin. And I met her actually after this, and she told me a little bit more details about this. But, it was a 40-hour full week job to just create this spreadsheet of all of the injuries of the park. And these were things they weren't reporting, like they were not reporting most injuries unless you left on ambulance. Like really your injury probably wasn't getting reported.
Didn't they have to buy their own ambulance because the city was tired of it?
Yeah, 2 ambulances actually.
2 ambulances, sorry.
Yeah, they were overwhelming the emergency services. And it was also kind of like a not our problem bit too for the town because the nearest hospitals weren't in Vernon. They weren't in town. There was one in New Jersey, but then the one that a lot of people ended up with was actually across the state line in New York. So he wasn't even the same state. It would be in Warwick, New York. They're just sending this constant shipment of injured kids to this hospital, like literally every day.
I mean, a theme park run or a water park run by kids, the ambulance doesn't make me feel safer.
No, and it was actually it was they kind of kept as much as they could in terms of the infirmary, first aid, and emergency services in house to avoid reporting things, to avoid it being really known how severe the injuries were, how often people were getting injured. So I spoke to one employee who was kind of put on ambulance duty as like a job, driving the ambulance, and they would just drive that thing around with the sirens on for fun, to like speed around traffic and stuff because Action Park.
Well, didn't they also take the go-karts out on the highway at some
I think,
point?
yeah,
This
it's a
all adds
misnomer
up.
to call them go-karts because they were actually like full Indy style racing cars, Lola cars as it
Okay.
happened. So they could go,
They were just
go-karts.
fixed, so they weren't supposed to go fast.
Yeah, well, but
They found a workaround.
yeah, they would modify the speed governor. But they also, even without that, these were not like your roadside go-kart, kind of like you're driving down
Gotcha.
I Drive, seeing a go-kart place kind of go-karts. These were like open cockpit Indy race cars, like legitimately the same ones that were used in like races. Lola cars are called. And they would go 50, 60 miles per hour, sometimes even faster. And the employees would, get drunk and take them on the highway. There was a highway that ran through the middle of the park, separating the water park from the motor park areas. They would take them on the highway at night and just kind of race each other while getting liquored up. Happened regularly. I spoke to an employee in the movie who, drove it on the highway.
Yeah, wasn't he a manager at one point in the park too?
He was a manager. Yeah. And then we had video footage of them doing that too, which was kind of an amazing finding people, because that was kind of one of those things that was sort of urban legendy. So finding both somebody that had done this and then video footage of it was really cool.
I think that's what's important about films like these, is where we may have heard these stories before, but when you take it for granted just viewing this, of how difficult it must have been to actually find proof of these stories and visual like reference.
Yeah.
So we know that you're not just making it up. Look, there it is.
Yeah, I mean that was important, because otherwise it's like, there you could just read the Wikipedia page or something if you wanted to hear the urban legends. It was really to some degree like, what here is true, kind of investigating the myth, investigating the legend. And as it happens, like basically everything is true, and then some. There's no reason to make up stories about Action Park, because if you were there for any length of time, you saw crazy stuff that as a writer you'd have a hard time making up. It's like creative ways of breaking rules and boundaries that never would have occurred to me.
So speaking of Wikipedia tells me that Johnny Knoxville's Action Point was inspired by your short film.
I was told this as well. That's correct.
It's on Wikipedia, so it must be true.
It must be true. Yeah. That's kind of cool, isn't it? So,
it is pretty cool.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Speaking of chumming the waters, like you brought the name back to the park. You got people to come out of the woodwork, built the nostalgia necessary for an entire film to be made, and then. But I'm glad that you got to tell the whole story, so to speak, and that it's got such a wide release. That's so great.
Yeah, I kind of felt like after the short came out, I'd sort of become a part of the Action Park story in a weird way, and it's and I got to meet an extraordinarily large number of people who grew up certainly going to the park, but also working at the park. I'm in kind of numerous like private Facebook groups of former Action Park employees and whatnot. And it's such an interesting, kind of amazing group of formerly young, now, middle-aged people. Because you have to imagine you're 15 years old and you're working at this place and just constantly seeing injuries, sometimes seeing deaths, seeing just crazy stuff happening to you, like what that has to do with you. And so I was really interested in like how these kids kind of turned out 30 years later. Like, how does this build resilience? Is this a traumatic upbringing? Like, what is this? And that was really amazing, just kind of seeing how these people all are today. And, a lot of them are the ones who look back. A lot of these people are the ones who are looking back and laughing at Action Park. And I think they're allowed to laugh at it because it was their traumatic upbringing. They saw.
Yeah, they're survivors of this.
They're survivors. It's a coping mechanism. And it's not just like the rides. It's the other sort of ancillary effects of being in this town, this really small rural town that suddenly has like 1 million people a year visiting this amusement park, and the other things that sort of happen as a result, like injuries and deaths, not directly related to like a defective ride, but example, like a bus was going to Action Park one day and a horrible accident occurred and like a half dozen people died, and all these kids are like seeing this stuff happen. Or there was an oil tanker that got upturned right in front of the park, and the driver was stuck in the cab underneath the oil tanker part, and they couldn't use the jaws of life to extricate him because the sparks would have potentially caused an explosion. So these like 16-year-old kids are literally seeing this guy give his last words while EMTs are giving him morphine through the window, knowing that he's about to die. And it's like growing, and that's your teenage years. Like, what does that do to you? And I think that was really interesting because the same people who grew up going to Action Park, working at Action Park, really this freewheeling, feral, latchkey upbringing, they're now like today's helicopter parents is what it is. And seeing that swing,
You think it's a direct cause and effect?
100%. No chance. Like
Growing
yeah,
up in the 80s has turned. Okay.
Yeah, there's simultaneously the people like kids today have lost something, but it's like, would you let your kid go there? Hell no, they wouldn't, you know? And that to us was something that was so interesting about Action Park, yes, but also just growing up in the 80s in general, how it created this generation of people who look back fondly at these experiences, but want nothing, they want their kids to have nothing to do with them.
Thank you so much for joining us, Seth. Where can everyone find you on the internet?
At Seth Porges, that's SethPorges, and Class Action Park, the movie, is right now available on HBO Max. And if you're like, I don't have HBO Max, well, there's a free 7-day trial. Whatever you do after that, it's up to you.
There's some Looney Tunes on there, but start with the
Studio,
Class Action Park.
Studio Ghibli or Ghibli. I will lose all my nerd cred by getting that wrong. But Studio Ghibli. I hear the Harley Quinn cartoon's really good also. So that.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true.
Lovecraft Country's on there too. And
Lovecraft Country, all the HBO stuff. Yeah, all the HBO stuff.
Yeah.
Brandos. Yeah, have a good time. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, and one day it'll be on Roku and Fire Stick. I swear, just one day.
I can't comment on that. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay.
Okay. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks to everyone for listening to this interview. Do go check out that film. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
These are the most amazing rides in the world. I love it here.
There's nothing in the world like Action Park.